Revenue is probably the most misunderstood metric in business, but it's the one that everyone obsesses over. We post screenshots of it. We compare companies by it. We even set our goals by saying things like,
I want a $100 million a year business.
But here's the problem. Revenue only shows how money came into your business. It doesn't tell you whether your business is growing or dying. You can double your revenue while becoming less profitable. You can triple your revenue and be one bad month away from running into serious cash problems. There are so many businesses out there chasing vanity metrics that are actually killing their business. When you get down to it, the real question shouldn't be, did we increase our revenue? It should be, did we increase our revenue and improve the health of the business at the same time? So in this video, I want to walk through the 9 business metrics that I believe every founder should master. And while it can be a vanity metric, I want to start with number 1, which is revenue. Revenue is how much money came into your business before you have any expenses. Seems obvious. You're like, yeah, I get it. I know that one. But I do want to look at why this is important because there are different ways to measure revenue. And if you're running a business that's more like a service business or a coaching business versus a business that has millions of dollars in inventory, how you recognize revenue is going to look a little bit different. So the simplest and most basic way is on cash collected. So this is money that is actually in your bank account. Revenue counts when it hits your bank account. And this is the most simple way to track your cash flow and ensure you have money to spend on the expenses that you need. The step below that is contracted revenue. So that is what clients have agreed to pay, not just what you have collected. And I'm going to get into this in an example below to look at how you can compare and contrast cash collected versus cash contracted, because a lot of this is dependent on what percentage of cash you collect upfront with your offer. The next one would be recognized revenue. And this is recorded when a service is delivered. And if you're using like an accrual accounting method, this is the accounting standard. So this revenue is recorded when the service is delivered. And that last one is recurring revenue. And so this is more predictable, repeating income. This is usually used for memberships or retainers where you know the rest of your numbers really well. So it gets easier to predict how much you'll have coming in. If you have the back end of your funnel really dialed in and you really know your numbers, you can pick the way that works best with your business model and your industry. But if you don't, and you're not sure on your back end numbers, cash is always going to win, especially for a coaching or a service business. You can't pay your employees on contract value. You can't pay for a lot of your expenses on contracted revenue. It's basically a promise of future revenue, but it does not guarantee that it's there. So the revenue will tell you the size and direction of the business, but it doesn't say anything about profitability. And using our 2 examples from above of cash versus contracted revenue, you can close someone at $120,000 in contract for a year, but if you only get $10,000 up front, you only have $10,000 in the bank. And if you start making decisions on having that $120,000, you're going to potentially run into a cash flow issue. And I see this happen so much with coaching businesses specifically, where they'll close, $500,000 in revenue, but they only collect 20% upfront. So they're making decisions based off that $500,000. And if you don't have a solid track record with knowing your completion percentage and what you're collecting and how many people are bailing out of contracts early, you can run into cash flow issues by inflating based off of looking at your contracted revenue over your cash collected revenue. So the revenue is going to tell you how much money comes in, but it's not going to tell you if your business is healthy or not. And so moving on to metric number 2, this is getting into the first part where we're starting to look at business health metrics as well. So metric number 2 is gross profit. And this is the money remaining after your cost of goods sold. So you're going to subtract your cost of goods sold from your revenue. So say for every $100 you make, you have $25 in cost of goods sold. Your gross profit is going to be $75. And gross profit is important because A business with high gross profit has more money to reinvest. So you have more money to reinvest into marketing. You have more money to reinvest into payroll, into hiring, into future growth. So basically, when you have a thin gross profit margin, every overhead expense is going to feel tight. It's going to feel like a threat. And when you ignore fulfillment costs because you're trying to deflate your costs of good sold and you kind of lump them into overhead, this can make you look more profitable than you actually are. So when you're looking at your cost of goods sold, make sure that you're actually calculating them properly and you're not inflating your P&L to make it look like your gross profit margin is higher. So gross profit margin is going to tell you how much money is left after you fulfill and serve on that customer. This next metric is probably my favorite metric. And if you master this one, this would be the one of the 9 that would be the one to really dial in, which is your contribution margin. So what contribution margin measures is after you deliver the service, you subtract all of the variable costs required to acquire that customer. So if your cost of goods sold to fulfill on that customer are $25, and then it costs you another 25 to acquire them. So this would be things like advertising, this would be sales commissions, this would be setter costs. Any type of variable customer cost that's there to acquire would be counted into these variable acquisition costs. So you would subtract those as well, and you'd be left with your contribution margin. Now, you want this number to be as high as humanly possible because the higher that number is, the more you're going to have left over to start getting into those fixed costs and growth and revenue in your pocket. And so contribution margin matters, and it's so important because it determines how aggressively you can scale. It determines how aggressive you can be with acquiring customers. And if you don't know this number, if you don't have this number dialed in, you have no clue how much you can actually afford to spend to acquire a customer. Moving on, metric number 4, which is your operating profit margin, which is basically your profit divided by your revenue. And the question we're answering here is your business model actually healthy? Adding on to where we were, if we have $100 in revenue, we subtract the 25 for cost of goods, we subtract the 25 for contribution margins, and then we have an operating overhead of $20. So this would include all of your other fixed overhead expenses. So this would be your leadership and management payroll. It'd be your administrative team, your customer support. If you rent a warehouse or a facility or office, this would be included in that. Professional services, software, any other fixed overhead that doesn't change with volume would be counted into your operating overhead. If you were to take that $100 in revenue and subtract what we've run through already, and we're adding in our operating overhead, you're left with an operating profit of $30 or a 30% margin. This is really determining how healthy your business model is and how healthy your profit margin is. So to look at something where you have a business that's doing twice as much revenue, if you're doing $1 million a year and your operating margin is 20% versus if you're doing 2 million and it's 11%, you could be running very close to the same operating profit. And so even when you double your revenue, if your operating margin is smaller, it means you're not going to have something that's going to scale as easily. And a lot of people try to scale off of revenue, but if you don't have this dialed in, it's going to break the higher you scale. And when you try to scale with problems, the problems scale with it. The problems don't go away because you add more revenue. So your growth should increase your efficiency, not just your complexity. Moving on to metric number 5. This is a fun one too, because this is cash flow. Most businesses don't fail. Most businesses don't feel that weighing pressure because your revenue goes down. You feel it because your cash goes down. When you have low cash in the bank and you need to hit payroll, you're not saying, hey, well, at least I have a lot of contracted revenue coming out over the next 6 months. Cash is the thing that pays your team. If you have that $120,000 contract value, you have $10,000 in cash collected. When you look at these 3 numbers, there are gaps that can exist if we're not careful to pay attention to these, we can land in hot water. So the first one would be payment plans. So kind of the example we talked about, but if a client is paying you a $1,500 a month payment on a $9,000 program, you're delivering it upfront now, but you're collecting over 6 months, that is creating a cash flow gap. Another thing would be refunds. If you get the cash up front, but a refund hits weeks after that revenue was collected and you've already planned on spending that to scale, you're going to hit problems there. So you need to know for payment plans what percentage of cash you usually collect through the full contract term. With refunds, you need to know what percentage of clients generally refund, both in terms of percentage total number, but also percentage of revenue. Financing could be another one. Loan repayments can reduce cash flow even when revenue is strong. And the other thing would be commission timing as well. So if you have a sales team where you're paying all of your commissions up front with no clawbacks, but you have people that are backing out of fulfillment before their contract is finished, that can create a gap as well. I mean, the big thing with this is cash funds your operations, revenue doesn't. You can have a big ClickFunnels award on your wall, but you could not have enough cash to make payroll. And that's the reality with a lot of businesses, especially when they hit 8 figures a year. There's a big increase in operational complexity when you hit that point. And if you're not paying attention to this, you can run into big problems. So cash funds operations, revenue does not fund operations. On to metric number 6. And metric number 6 and 7, I'm going to link together, but we're going to look at this one first, which is the customer acquisition cost, or the CAC, which this is basically the total acquisition expense divided by your new customers that you get in. And I want to look at a couple different ways to look at CAC, because when you measure this, you can look at platform versus blended. Personally, I like looking at blended CAC overall because this includes everything that you're spending to acquire customers, not just platform specific. So what it really means is essentially what you're paying to acquire a new customer. And it's good to understand both these numbers, because platform CAC would be your ad spend that's attributed to conversions. It's more of a signal than something you can use to make scaling decisions off of. When you use blended CAC, this is what's going to be what you're going to want to use in your LTV to CAC ratio. Spoiler alert, that's what's coming next. But everything you spend to acquire customers, you want to calculate this manually and track this. You don't want to go log into your ads manager and say like, oh, it's only costing me $300 to acquire a customer. You don't want to do that, because this is going to be a real number when it's calculated, and you're going to know you can use it to make decisions. So if you get that $400 or $300 CAC, you're not adding in commissions, setter pay, the other things that you need to take into account with acquisition costs. So your real number could be a widespread, like 3 or 4 times higher. And if you're trying to scale, assuming this number versus assuming this number, that's going to be very different. So some of the things that you can include in blended CAC, and this is going to be, again, industry dependent, but your advertising spend, if you're doing a lot of ad design, video copywriting, your sales commission, your DM setters, your phone setters, your marketing, if you have specific software and tools that you're using for this to acquire. And I like to personally overestimate the CAC because it's being a little bit more conservative with growth. I'm sure some of the fast growing tech bros would disagree with this, but to me, if you really want to protect your margin and protect your cash flow, if you're viewing your CAC as a little bit higher versus you're underestimating your CAC, when you underestimate your CAC, that's how you land in really tight cash flow binds. So blended CAC is the number that's going to determine whether your acquisition model is sustainable. And the platform CAC is a useful signal that maybe your ads are working well or your campaigns are looking good and that you can spend more. But you do want to make sure you're using blended CAC that's basically counting everything in that costs to acquire that customer. Platforms are going to measure what they can see, but you need to measure what you can actually spend. On to metric number 7, customer lifetime value. Piggybacking off of this, because CAC is important, yes, but you need to know your LTV to CAC ratio in order to really make the scale and really make this work at higher numbers. And every step you go up that ladder. So customer lifetime value is the amount a customer spends over their life cycle with you as a client. So from the very start until the very end, everything that follows, everything that you make from that customer. And since we touched on the CAC before, I just want to touch for a second on LTV to CAC ratio. And maybe I'm counting this as a 10th metric and I'm giving you a free bonus metric here, but this is going to tell you the health of your business. But more importantly, what I found is how cash feels. So if your CAC to LTV is below 1 to 1, you're losing money on every customer. If you get 1 to 1 up to 2 to 1, you're basically breaking even on acquiring customers, and you'll feel this. Your business will feel tighter cash flow. You'll feel like everything's on fire to some extent. And this is a danger zone, and you do want to try to get out of this. So the two ways to do this in its most simple form is you increase your LTV, you cut your acquisition costs. And I'm going to do a whole different video on this, but those are the two basic ways. When you start getting above 3 to 1, that's kind of the benchmark for like healthy, we'll say. You're going to feel okay cash flow wise once you get above here. If you get closer to 4, it will feel much better. But getting above 3 is usually the benchmark for like where that healthy floor is for where you want to be above. If you're getting up above 4, that means your unit economics are phenomenal. It means you either need to acquire more aggressively, you can spend more. This is where you can like really ramp and push into acquiring more. But if you are a cash flow business, what this means is you're bringing home a lot of cash that you can reinvest into something else. So this is going to be model dependent. If you're looking to scale and exit, you're going to behave differently at a 5 to 1 versus if you're looking to take that and reinvest into something outside of your business, then this is where you'll be in a good cash flow spot to do that. One element of LTV I want to look at that I don't think is talked about nearly enough is projected versus cohort LTV. Projected LTV is basically predicting what you think your LTV is going to be. And I see this a lot with people who don't track their numbers enough. You say, hey, what's the LTV of your customer? And they'll say, oh, well, it's probably like, I don't know, like 15,000-ish. But when you go actually look, it might be something closer to 8. In their head, they're running best case scenarios. They're looking at their smallest cohort of customers who are the top 1% of spenders. It's where they want it to be. It's where they want to brag about it being. But this is basically a prediction of what they think LTV is going to be, or looking at potential patterns or saying hypotheticals. Well, hypothetically, if we get our ascension rate to X, then our LTV will be X. Versus cohort LTV is looking at actual data. So it's taking a cohort of customers, say, for example, people who bought this $27 low ticket program. When you know what percentage of those ascend, when you know what those then spend on that next product, you can look at the actual cohort LTV of those purchasers. So this is using historical data within an actual group of buyers to say, I know a definitive number of this is what it is. And so when we use projected instead of cohort LTV, you're basically building an acquisition model on an assumption, not what is actually happening. So the likelihood of running into problems is much higher. And one more note before we move into the next metric, you do want to look at your fulfillment costs along with your LTV, because if you have a customer that's worth $10,000 in LTV and it costs you $7,000 to fulfill on that customer versus it costs you $2,000 to fulfill, that's going to be much different. So LTV CAC, important, super big metric to master, but also there is nuance to it because you want to look at your fulfillment costs. If you're running a very labor intensive, high fulfillment touchpoint, one-on-one coaching service versus a recurring SaaS or a group model or something like that, this is going to look very different. So make sure to be aware of that. Metric number 8, revenue per employee or for full-time equivalent if you do have part-time and full-time mixed in. So this is basically your annual revenue divided by your full-time equivalent employees. And basically what this means, if you have a standard employee working 40 hours a week, that would be a full-time employee. If you have 2 working 20 hours a week, that would be combined 1 full-time equivalent. So you have the 40-hour, the 20-hour, and the 20-hour, that would be 2 full-time equivalents. And so this is the measure of how productive your organization is in terms of your employees rather than just a headcount, because I know headcount is another thing like revenue where people really like to talk about it. People like to say, I have 100 employees, I have 50 employees. But if you're looking at vanity metrics, you can end up being extremely inefficient, which again is going to create bigger problems at scale. So, what this measures is how much revenue the business generates for each full time employee or full time equivalent on a team. And it's basically a proxy for organizational efficiency and productivity. And I want to look at an example of growth here because a lot of people will say 20% growth is awesome. I wish my business could grow 20% on paper. So if you have a revenue of 1.2 million and you have 8 full-time equivalents, you're generating $150,000 per employee. If you grow 20%, your revenue will go up to 1.44 million, but you hire on 7 extra employees to do that. Your revenue per employee is going to be $96,000. So even though you had an increase in revenue of 20%, you had a decrease in productivity of 36%. So the business just became more expensive for you to run, not more efficient. And I know people love to say, well, I'm just going to grow into that. People will overhire assuming they're going to grow into that, but you're just creating an inefficient business, and then people like throwing people at problems rather than solving problems. So this is an important metric to look at. It's less of a head count and it's more of a productivity signal. Now, this doesn't mean that you should just go lay off all of your people. It means you should dial in each part of your business functions and your systems and your operations in order to make sure you can generate more revenue per employee. So the goal isn't hiring fewer people. It's not laying off people. It's basically ensuring that for every hire you make, it's earning that complexity. So when the revenue does come, it's going to scale along with the headcount, and it's not going to bloat your payroll, which is going to whack out so many other numbers. So that's something to watch because this is one that people skip, and I have a whole video on this coming out next. All right, and that last metric, and this is going to be more of a blanket metric, and we're going to call it a customer retention metric. Every business has some version of this, and almost everybody underestimates how important this is. People love looking at sales, people love looking at marketing, but fulfillment and customer retention is usually where people don't pay as much attention, but this is where most of the profit can come from when you do it right. And so I want to look at this customer life cycle where we basically have acquisition, we onboard, we deliver the product, we get the result, they renew, they refer, and that's that customer life cycle. So many people spend all of their time right here, right in number one. They get great at marketing, they get great at sales. They really focus on acquiring the customer, but then they skip the rest of this process. So I want to look at a couple different retention metrics based on different business models because these will be different dependent on what type of model you run. So for coaching, a retention metric would be renewal rate, which is basically the percentage of clients who purchase another package. So if you're in fitness industry and you're selling a year-long coaching program, what percentage of clients are purchasing another package after this? And there is some nuance to this because in something like fitness, let's say somebody comes on for a year, they have the best experience ever, they hit their exact goal, they refer you to people. Just because they don't renew doesn't mean that's a failure, but you still want to track this because it becomes predictable with what percentage of clients purchase another package. And this doesn't have to be the same offer again. This can be a continuity offer where they go into a lower tiered membership. This can be, a lighter version of what you offer, but there's different ways you can measure that. The next one is the membership model, which you're going to look at monthly churn rate. This is the percentage of members who cancel each month. This becomes predictable. So you need to learn what percent drop out, how many you need to replace those. For low ticket programs or courses, ascension rate is a good one to look at. So if you're selling a $27 program, what percentage of those ascend into your coaching program? So that's a good one to look at. You can actually see offer efficiency looking at this with low ticket programs to see which offer potentially ascends more. For e-commerce, it can be your repeat purchase rate, what percentage of customers buy again. So they could buy a different product, might buy that same product over and over. For SaaS, this would be net revenue retention, which is the revenue retained after churn, upgrades, and downgrades. And if you have investors, this one is especially important. For agencies, it can be client retention rate, which is the percentage of clients retained over a defined period of time. So depending on what you offer, what your client lifecycle is, you want to look at what percentage you're retaining during that predefined period. So why is this important? This is important because a retained customer is one you do not have to reacquire. And retention is what's going to ultimately compound growth. Every customer who stays reduces the number of new customers. You need to maintain revenue. So if you're only relying on new acquisitions to grow your business, it's going to be so much harder than putting more focus onto the customer base you already have. And I think a lot of people underestimate why this happens and where to look. How can I get wins as quickly as possible? When you close somebody on your sales call, what's your handoff process like to hand off to fulfillment? How quickly before they get booked into their onboarding call? If you're waiting a week, you're risking starting off with a bad experience. So poor onboarding could be your bottleneck in retention if you have a really good service that you deliver once you get them past there. The next problem is inconsistent delivery, and this can happen more in a high touchpoint one-on-one service where coaches are fulfilling on this, because if each coach is fulfilling differently, you're going to get very different results and you're going to get very different levels of trust. So this is where systems and operations are so important, because you want to productize your delivery as much as possible so the coaches can still use their strong points and their personalities, but the delivery stays consistent. That delivery mechanism, those processes are still there. So you know your clients are getting certain parts of the experience that you can control. They're getting delivered the same way every time. Another way is weak communication. A quiet client does not always mean a happy client. So if customers feel forgotten, if they don't feel listened to, if they feel ignored, if they feel like a number, that's going to start to cause retention problems. And you're going to start getting people that are either going to be canceling memberships, going to look to buy somewhere else, going to look to competitors to replace what you do. And the last one would be no customer success. So there's nobody managing the relationship with the client. There's no CSM that's overseeing the experience, not working one-to-one directly with them necessarily, but overseeing the overall experience to make sure things are going well. Because when you have someone in a customer success position who's doing it right, you're going to get more reviews, you're going to get more referrals, you're going to get more renewals. This is going to be an active way to drive retention that a lot of people don't think about it. And one good CSM can boost your retention a ton if you implement and drive it the right way. So a lot of people think retention is a sales problem, but it's not. It's usually a fulfillment problem. When a customer says no to a renewal, the problem has probably been going on for months because a client hasn't said anything to just assume everything must be great if they're not saying anything. That's not good. The retention starts from the very start, from the very handoff during onboarding. Remember that when you retain customers, it's going to help your business compound. But if you're constantly replacing customers, you're going to just be stuck on that treadmill of constantly feeling stressed to acquire. You're going to constantly be at mercy of the ad algorithms, the acquisition costs. The big takeaway from this, from revenue to customer retention, if you master these 9 metrics, you are going to have a business that not only generates a lot of revenue, but is also extremely efficient and something that will last long term. I know it's so tempting to just chase top line revenue. It's so tempting to just chase employee headcount. But when you build the right way, you're going to build something healthy that will last long term. So if you like this video, go take these 9 metrics and master them. Be sure to subscribe because I'm going to be posting more videos like this on building a long-term healthy business. And leave a comment if there's something you want to hear about. I'd love to hear from you.